Hi everyone, welcome to our very first session for the Can You Hear Us speaker series. My name is Kitty and I use she, her pronouns, and I am an Asian woman with black hair and a ponytail, wearing a green button up with a drape in the corner and a relatively bright white background. And for those who are there, I'd like to acknowledge that we are re-recording this introduction because we had a disruption in the first session. And so we've cut out that part in the recording because we didn't want to further traumatize folks and to keep that interruption there. And really are just grateful to everyone for being really gracious and patient with us while that happened. Because it also just further underscores the necessity of what we're talking about today. And so before we get started, I wanted to begin the session with a land acknowledgement. The Can You Hear Us campaign acknowledges the sacred land upon which we work, live, make films, and build community, which has been a site of human activity for thousands of years. As a national campaign, we know that this land is home to Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. And so we recognize the repeated violations of sovereignty, territory, and water perpetuated by settlers and colonizers who have impacted the original inhabitants of this land. And we extend our respect to citizens of these nations who live here today and their ancestors and all Indigenous peoples. We also affirm that this acknowledgement is insufficient. It doesn't undo the harm that has been done and continues to be perpetuated now against Indigenous people and their land and water. And so we ask today's audience to consistently recognize the original stewards of their land, to follow Indigenous leadership, and to financially support and resource local Indigenous efforts. And we also want to thank the Upstander Project and Cultural Survival for letting us borrow some of this language. And also acknowledge that I am calling in today from Lenape Canarsie land, which now is more so known as Brooklyn. And so the Can You Hear Us speaker series is aimed at rethinking how can we reframe our relationship with the planet from one that is extractive to one that is healing and energizing and honest. And we want to help center the voices and experiences of BIPOC leaders in the climate movement and strengthen our collective power and intergenerational movement building for a better future. This series has been produced as part of a larger impact campaign titled Can You Hear Us?, which accompanies the Hulu original documentary I Am Greta. And we have different links available associated with this where you can check out more about the campaign focus and resources and a great map of local partners for you to get more involved. And so definitely check that out in the description. And also, we do have closed captioning burned in, and if you have any other preferred styles of communication for this recording or for future recordings, please do let us know. We want to try to make these events as accessible to as many people as possible, and so we're always trying to do better on that front. And so today's moderator is Jerry Friedman from Elders for Climate Action. And Jerry self-describes herself as someone who's been part of the women's movement and war movement and environmental movement and is now really just trying to support the future generation. Unfortunately, we don't have Jerry's first introduction recorded because we had a little bump in that process. So you'll begin today with seeing Orion Camero from Camero. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have Jerry's introduction in this recording because of a little bump in that process. So you'll begin today with seeing Orion Camero from SustainUS. Enjoy!
Just a lot of gratitude for the ongoing challenge I think all of us are facing in the wake of shifting paradigms. How do we shift paradigms on our own terms as communities? And so, thinking about issues like, wealth redistribution, ways that we can think about reparations for Black and Indigenous communities and those on the front lines of environmental racism. And yeah, really reckoning with the fact that at this moment, one of the things that has emerged has been this whole idea of a Green New Deal and how do we channel labor to make basically create economic structures of support while trying to transition our economy out of an extractive one. And the thing that I feel like is important to name about this is how are we seeing that the momentum of that narrative needs to include global justice and reckoning with decades of imperialism, colonialism, and extraction that's happened overseas, and how we understand that building a world with climate justice means that we can't repeat the same patterns in the different ways that we shape these solutions. And so for thinking about the sort of mindset shifts that we need to make, um, one thing that feels really important is recognizing that in this moment, we see that there are massive examples of the climate crisis manifesting and impacting communities today in this current moment, with the massive cold snap in Texas to the wildfires that ravaged the West here, where I am, and recognizing that communities need to build stronger networks of resilience together, um, and thinking that is a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of potential for paradigm shifts to happen in many different angles and ways. Um, Even us as an organization, SustainUS, we are in living questions now, even in the wake of the pandemic, to reckon with what is our role in being able to hold our governments accountable to the policy that we need, but recognizing that we need to channel our labor as in people power and in actual um, sort of initiatives that we can take if we don't see that that action is being met on the other end. Um, and so one of the things I would love to really understand as well is that uh, that we need to start getting more real about the fact that colonialism and imperialism is even embedded in some of the systems of advocacy, in the systems that of intervention that we're trying to have, and recognizing how we different as different strands of the movement come together to uh, shape the conditions for a better world, if and doing so even if our our officials aren't able to show up in those ways. And so we see that with mutual aid efforts that are happening across the country in the wake of these disasters. And I think that what really feels important is that we're being called to use and imagine a different world by seeing that these different sectors of society that we're in, um, that we're able to have the conversations that we need to in order to stimulate the change that we need to see. And so when I think about climate change, I really, or climate organizing, I think that one thing that feels important, if anything, if there's anything to really take from what I'm speaking is just the fact that the climate crisis is, in essence, an interdisciplinary problem with many different roots that we need to examine. We need to examine the historical context of the climate crisis, the social impacts based on different identities. We need to examine the fact that it's not solely an environmental crisis, that there are deep connections, cultures of disposability and greed that's related to how we treat people and the planet. And that's why I feel like it's so critical to be able to have the awareness of the climate crisis as being a social, economic, and ecological crisis, and to be able to understand that drawing those links gets us closer to having the conversations that then become the actions that we take to build a better world for all peoples. Um, and so, yeah, there's a lot that I could say. I'm really grateful to be able to be here with you all. And um, one thing that I would like to offer is to speak to one of the things that we do in SustainUS as well is understand that song is actually a practice of like healing and connection and ways to integrate some of the heavy conversations we have in our organization. As young people, we all grapple with really heavy topics by virtue of being so connected to the global political space. In the UN, we face and navigate so many complex dynamics with representatives of corporations, governments, and in the nonprofit sector, so many of our grassroots organizational partners and folks just working towards building a better world. Um, we ask really heavy questions about how to change our society, and so song has always been a source of support for us in our work. So I'd like to actually offer maybe a couple of songs to close out my time, just to be able to process the things that we're going through in a different way. So yeah, so I have a couple of songs that I wanted to share. Uh, this first song actually comes from one of our former delegates, Kyle Lemley from uh, the Thrive East Bay, is a singing group here in the Bay Area. And he wrote this song for the Rise for Climate, Jobs, and Justice March that happened in 2018. And this song is, yeah, just about sort of the call to action to rise. So I hope you all enjoy it, and you can sing along if you'd like, muted. So yeah. May these songs be received as a gift to weather the storm that we're all experiencing. We rise before the seas, we rise as tall as trees, we rise not just for you and me, but for all humanity. We rise before the seas, we rise as tall as trees, we rise not just for you and me, but for all humanity. We rise, rise for liberation. We rise, rise for all creation. We rise, rise for liberation. We rise, rise for all creation. We rise before the seas, we rise as tall as trees, we rise not just for you and me, but for all humanity. We rise before the seas, we rise as tall as trees, we rise not just for you and me, but for all humanity. We rise, rise for liberation. We rise, rise for all creation. We rise, rise for liberation. We rise, rise for all creation. Whew. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all so much. Just, I want to invite us all to really tap into our senses for a second. So often we're here on these digital spaces, and even I'll be real, I felt nervous before coming onto this. So I'm grateful for y'all receiving me in my nervous self. But just, yeah, taking a second to actually be in our bodies, to look at the environment around us. Maybe if we have a window near you, to stare out into that window and see the world that is there and the world that we want to create. And yeah, just recognize that we want to give ourselves patience and compassion for this process. This conversation is just a seed of something that we want to tend to, something that we want to have grow. And when we think about global and intergenerational organizing, just knowing that, that happens a relationship at a time, it happens a conversation at a time, it happens a connection at a time. And so just want to honor the fact that, you know, we're all here trying to find that what collective liberation looks like. What does it mean to find climate justice? What does it mean to tend our communities that are in pain right now? I want to send special prayers and good intentions to folks right now on the front lines of mutual aid support, whether it's our relatives out in Texas, whether it's our relatives out, um, you know, even on the front lines of line 3 right now in the pipeline. So just, yeah, giving well wishes to all those that are putting down their effort and their labor of love for climate justice. And so the last thing I want to share is actually just one more song before I hand it off. And this song is a song that I wrote this year, just really thinking about what does collective liberation feel like, look like, and just knowing that that work, it happens um, it happens from microcosm to macrocosm. It happens when we're tender with ourselves, when we're non-disposable with ourselves, when we work on nurturing the parts that are untended in who we are. And that sort of mindset, to see that in the ways that we extend that to our extended relationships, how we extend that to our communities, and how as communities we shape the society that we want to see. So yeah, this song is a sort of reminder of that. Yeah, that it's really all about trust, and trusting the intuition in ourselves, and trusting in the better communities that we know we can make happen. Uh, Trust in us, act from intuition, honor all, will weave in right relation. Trust in us, act from intuition, honor all, will weave in right relation. Trust in us, act from intuition, honor all, will weave in right relation. Oh, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Orion. That was absolutely beautiful. It's putting me in this really cool, calm place right now. So thank you. I would like to introduce you now to our next speaker, Katherine Manga. She's a community development worker, a researcher, and a peasants' rights advocate. She was born from a family of farmers in the Bicol region south of Luzon. She worked as a researcher and international officer for IBON Foundation after she finished her studies from the University of the Philippines. In 2007, she pursued her passion for theater and the arts and worked full-time in community theater, advocating for farmers' land rights. With her performing group, Sing Bayan, or Art for the People, she was able to teach young people, especially from the rural areas, the value of theater and the arts in advocating for land, human rights, and rural development. Having established the group with its regional chapters all over the country, she then decided to shift to another aspect of community development work and volunteered to be a full-time staff of the Kilusang Magbubukid, Pilipinas in 2018, where she's now a project coordinator. She's one of the conveners of the Agroecology X, a unique community of organizations, associations, sustainable agriculture practitioners and advocates, social entrepreneurs, organic food buffs, and many other believers and doers of agroecology. She also heads the Secretariat of the year-long National Food Systems Summit, which is happening in Manila in 2021. Please welcome Katherine Manga.
Hello, everyone. Good morning from the Philippines. Good morning from Manila. Good evening to you all in the US. I am Katherine Manga. I am from the Peasant movement of the Philippines, or the Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas. I am a Filipina with a she/her pronoun. I have shoulder-length hair, and right now I'm wearing a blue blouse with white pattern embroidery. I have a brown background. As I do miss my going around my country for almost a year now, I would like to share with you. I would like to take you to some of the places, the beautiful places of my country, and acknowledge its tribes and its forefathers as well. So let me stop share first. Okay. Make sure that you have the sound. We are an archipelago with 7,700 islands. The Philippines boasts of many different kinds of natural water, such as bays, rivers, lakes, falls, gulfs, straits, and swamps. Because it is made up of islands, its coastline, if laid from end to end, would measure around 17.5 thousand kilometers. For hundreds of years before the Spanish colonizers set foot on our shores, this land was home to more than 60 tribes, skilled weavers and artisans, divers and navigators, warriors and freedom fighters. From the Igorots of the north, the Bontocs, the Ibaloy, the Isneg, to the Itas and the Atis of the Visayas Island, as well as the Tumanduks and the Lumads of Mindanao. This country is rich in natural resources. It has fertile arable lands, diverse flora and fauna, extensive coastlines, and rich mineral deposits. Fifth of the most mineralized country in the world. It is third in gold, fourth in copper, fifth in nickel reserves. Around 30% of the country's total land area has important metallic mineral deposits. Its geography and topography is a gorgeous combination of rough and rugged beauty. This country is a rich country, but with all its bounty and its richness, it is home to 26 million Filipinos who are living in poverty. And they do not control nor own these resources. With 3/4 of its population living in the rural areas and with agriculture as their main source of livelihood, they continue to live in poverty and in hunger. I would like to introduce to you the work of my organization and the people that we work with. So, who are the peasants? Who are the Filipino peasants? This photo was taken in one of our communities in Central Luzon. This is a photo of a peasant or an actual tiller who do not own the land they till. In the Philippines, 9 out of 10 Filipino peasants do not own the land they till. With the lack of genuine land reform and rural development, hunger and rural poverty has been in the country for years. For us, how we manage our land is critical to climate justice, whether that is on the issue of people's diet or on land grabbing or on land conversion and others. For us, controlling our land as one of our most productive resources will determine how we can move forward and what kind of development and for who that development is. My organization, KMP, or Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas, was founded during the culmination of the struggle of the Filipinos under the fascist dictator of the Marcos rule. It is a product of advanced anti-feudal peasant struggles in various regions in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, the three major islands of the country. And it is a consolidation of the Philippine peasant movement at the national level. This photo was taken in 1986, one of the first big mobilizations or rallies that the KMP organized. The main goal of KMP is to advocate for free distribution of land to landless Filipino peasants through genuine agrarian reform program and to emancipate them from various forms of oppression and exploitation. For Filipino farmers, land is life. And for Filipino peasants and farmers who have been deprived of their right to till the land is justice. To be able to cultivate it, to become its steward, and to be able to nourish it while it nourishes you back means that families can have a chance to build sustainable and self-reliant communities. And it means food for everyone. For KMP, fighting hunger and poverty, which has ailed this country for years, would need one major thing, and that is land to the tillers. The main goal of KMP is to advocate for free distribution of land to the landless Filipino peasants. This is a photo of an agricultural worker, actually a sugarcane worker taken in Negros. It comes from the archives of our chapters in Negros. So what is genuine agrarian reform? For us, our narrative as a people is a long history of colonization by the Spaniards who colonized us for 300 years, the Americans directly colonizing us for 48 years and with strong influence up until now. Our land and productive resources, including our labor, is at the hands of a few ruling elites like the Sorianos, the Ayalas, the Lopezes, the Sobels, the Aranetas. Most also are politicians. Some have become presidents in the past, together with foreign agribusinesses who control vast tracts of lands in the country. For KMP, genuine agrarian reform is the breaking of land monopoly by a few. A few elites. It is a thoroughgoing distribution of land to the landless peasant tillers, and with free distribution as the basic principle and the central goal. So what does organizing and resistance look like for the peasant movement in the Philippines? For us, organizing is a process of tireless education work through community consultations, discussions, assemblies. We build capacity of our local chapters and its leaders so they may be able to mobilize their communities for local campaigns, local socio-political and campaigns. This is, for example, is an assembly in the Negros region. These are sugar workers who were about to launch their land cultivation campaign in the area. So for our farmers who lead local campaigns, they lead local campaigns on economic issues against land grabbing by local and foreign landlords or agri-corporations and plantations, displacement from farmlands, or against land-related human rights violations. We also have localized campaigns against intensive militarization in rural communities. We launch campaigns based on the local issues faced by our communities. We design these campaigns and the level of engagement based on their capacity and their organizational strength. This, for example, is a photo of our peasant organization, local organization in Bohol, with Humabol as the provincial chapter and Titifa, or Trinidad Talibon Integrated Farmers Association, a 30-year-old organization responsible for winning the farmers' fight to till 622 hectares of sequestered land from the Marcoses. It was recently attacked by the military, trying to forcibly take over the leadership of the organization. What the military did was they gathered farmers and held farce election, and they they had new officers. They did it last October 22, but despite the desperate attempt to destroy the local organization, the genuine leaders stood their ground fully, disowning the renegades and the election and the theatrics that the military did. In the recent years, this organization, who already developed their own rice mill and their own communal farm, was also was raided, and the military tried to close down the mill of the farmers. But the community gathered around that mill, and it was stopped. The picture beside it is a picture of a rice farmer, and this is one of our major campaigns on rice tariffication, or the importation of rice. And we push the different components at the same time. We have work in social media. These are some of the examples of our publicity materials that we do on social media. We have online media forums. We have what do you call this? A series of webinars. We also have dialogues with local agencies. And we have, of course, mobilizations and rallies as a big part of our campaigns. In 2017, KMP launched its nationwide campaign to set up collective land cultivation areas, or bungkalan. Bungkalan, or cultivation in English, is the centerpiece campaign of KMP. It is widely coordinated, organized, and the simultaneous cultivation of idle land, while the people continuously engage with policymakers on their rural issues and for land reform. This brings back the spirit of bayanihan, or cooperation among the farmers, which was destroyed when the Green Revolution was introduced to them. In bungkalan areas, farmers directly confront land grabbers, land conversion, and pesticide-based agriculture. They exercise collective decision-making on what crops and what farming methods will sustain their family, and of course, what will sustain the land. It has also become a form of solidarity from other community members like students, workers, scientists, and artists who immerse and who visit the farm and learn with the farmers. In Bungkalan, we are able to develop our farmers as leaders, as organizers, as farmer scientists, as well as farmer scientists, as mentored by our networks who teach them sustainable agriculture and agroecological farming practices. I would like to share with you a story of one of our areas, one of our farmer areas in San Jose del Monte, Bulacan, which is around 40 kilometers north of Metro Manila. So for 36 years, the farmer organization, the Alliance of Farmers in Bulacan, have been defending the rich forest and agricultural lands from the encroachment of big real estate developers in the country. Even without production support from the government, the farmers have painstakingly cultivated their farm lots and parcels of land. They sell their products to nearby markets and in Bulacan, to nearby markets in Bulacan and Metro Manila. This area of Bulacan is part of the longest mountain range in the country, the Sierra Madre mountain range, which protects the northern part of the Philippines, Luzon, against the strongest typhoons. The Philippines is often visited by strong typhoons, and I can say that in a year, maybe every month we have typhoons. Even in the summer, we have typhoons in the Philippines. For us, the farmers, having harnessed and protected the natural resources, is enough for them to have the right to till the land. AMB, or the local organization, have been through decades of threats, harassments, and militarization, but the organization has successfully defended defended its occupied mountains and fields, they stand strong today as stewards of the land. Vast agricultural forest areas are being morphed right now by big corporations and landlords into private malls, shopping malls, and exclusive subdivision or housing. Long before KMP launched its land cultivation campaign called Bungkalan, the AMB has already set up their own land cultivation area in Bulacan. So this is a photo of a barangay or as a village in Bulacan in 2014 when it was still, when the people were still threatened to be demolished. It was all barren that time. But when they succeeded in defending that part of land, and they started to expand their farms, first by planting bananas in the areas and then other crops and fruit-bearing trees in the following years. After 4 years, this is this is what it looks like right now, with lots of crops with bananas around the farm. Countless times, the farmers of AMB have been harassed and ordered to leave the premises. Their bananas were cut by the goons of the Aranetas and the Villars, but they remain fighting for their right to till. After all, some of them already have won their cases in the Department of Agrarian Reform, but with the very slow process of awarding them of their land, the land grabbers are still able to fence their land and still able to destroy the crops in the fields. When this happened in January, we launched a big social media campaign, and with all the comments coming from our supporters, coming from the advocates and the community itself, this was stopped by the local government. So AMB farmers are part of our Bagsakan Farmers Market. Bagsakan means drop-off point for produce. In the past years, our farmers would bring their crops and products during rallies and dialogues, and they would sell them to supporters and to people on the streets. This way, even though they are participating in a political activity, they are still able to they're still able to earn. During the lockdown, many farmers were not able to transport their products to the market. So we set up an online farmers market on Facebook. So from March until late November, we were able to deliver close to 20,000 kilos of vegetables in Metro Manila and in the nearby cities. So one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now is the intensified political repression in the country. Amid the pandemic, the anti-terrorism bill is now signed into law. This law targets civil society organizations and individuals who are critical of the Duterte government. We oppose this law mainly because the definition of terrorism is overboard. Anyone can be charged inciting to terrorism. Anyone can easily be arrested without judicial warrant and detained for more than 2 weeks. Actually, this is already happening. Anyone suspected can be subjected to surveillance without court order for 90 days. Exercising your freedom of speech, your freedom of the press, and peaceful assembly can be curtailed and grossly violated. We have already received several subpoenas for the different mobilizations and rallies we have attended. Some of our leaders have already have cases filed against them for joining mobilizations. It actually violates the Bill of Rights enshrined in our 1987 Constitution, and it threatens our exercise and enjoyment of the basic democratic rights and fundamental freedoms. Since the start of the Duterte administration in 2016, we have monitored 323 peasant and farmer killings. Of this number, 70 were killed during the COVID lockdown. Some of the farmers and advocates killed during the lockdown, I will share with you some of them. So one of them is our Deputy Secretary General, Randall Etchanis, who was killed last August 10, 2020. He was brutally murdered, stabbed more than 40 times. Inside his apartment, this old man who was living alone because he was separated. He got separated with his family during the lockdown. He was attacked. He is a peace advocate. He is a panel to the peace talks and advisor to the peace talks with the government in the National Democratic Front. He is one of the major force behind the passing of the irrigation law. He has helped us with a lot of policies that we have passed to our lawmakers. On yesterday marked his 7th month of death, and still no justice for our Deputy Secretary General. Another farmer killed during the lockdown was Romy Torres. Romy Torres was an active member of the AMB, or the Bagsakan Farmers. This is a photo of our mobilization in front of the headquarters of the Philippine National Police. This is a photo of Romy when he was still alive, and when he was with the farmers of his community when they were about to deliver relief goods to the different displaced farming communities in the nearby areas. Romy was found stuffed in a drum in another province days after he was reported missing by his family. This fenced area here used to be his farm. So on the day that he was killed, he tried entering and harvesting his bananas so that he can sell it and support his family. Another case of massacre is the massacre of the Tumanduks, or the tribe of Tumanduks in Panay, which is in Visayas. 9 Tumanduk men were killed in the morning of in late December. After they were killed, the key witness to the Tumanduk massacre, an LGBT chief, barangay captain, or village chief, was also shot dead. He was the key witness to the murder of this indigenous people. And the lawyer who supports them was recently stabbed about 2 weeks ago in the same city. He was assaulted by 2 unidentified masked men. And recently, very recently, we have the case of our environmental defenders who were killed in a series of operations in Southern Tagalog. So on March 5, President Duterte gave orders about how to deal with communist rebels to the police and to the military at a meeting in Cagayan de Oro. Duterte said, kill them all, finish them, and don't mind human rights, because after all, he was the only one to be imprisoned after all. So following this statement, in the early dawn of March 7, a synchronized police and military raid was done in the different areas of Calabarzon. The state forces had search warrants for 18 individuals. Most were known leaders and members of progressive organizations, activists in the regions. They were presented with the search warrant, but they were also shot and killed on the spot. The brutal incident is now referred to as Bloody Sunday, and we have had the UN speaking speaking they said that they were appalled by the incident. The EU also spoke about this. Different human rights organizations have released statements of condemnation about this. And today, actually, March 12 is the end of the effectivity of those 18 search warrants. So I am in front of you without sleep because we are of course worried that they will also come for us, and that we are also part of who they want to arrest. But just when we thought it ends there, the families of the slain victims, they were not given, the bodies of the victims were not given instantly to their families. They were held for 4 days, and it was only yesterday when the lawyers and the Commission on Human Rights trooped to the funeral parlor that the bodies, the remains of the slain activists were released to the families. Amid everything, you may ask, how do we move forward? What keeps us sane amid all the harassments, amid the killings of the people we know, of the people dear to us, of our comrades, of the people we have worked with through these years, our friends? For activists and land rights advocates like me, I think what keeps us going is the fact that in these hard times, we have communities who continue to assert their right to the land. Those who continue to nourish their relationship with the land. Our land that has for centuries given us hope every time there is harvest. We know that every time we take one step back, when we are tagged as terrorists, or when we are attacked, when we are harassed and killed, our farmers, our communities takes us 2 steps forward. With all their deep appreciation of our collective learnings and shared experiences as farmers and rights advocates, as partners for genuine social change. I think that our continuous struggle is our share in our global movement to achieve social justice. And I hope that somehow you have picked some points on how you can also do your campaigns and organizing work through our experience. But more than anything, I hope that you continue to support movements like us, like ours, because meeting you and sharing with you somehow opens doors and windows for us. Somehow it makes us realize that with your support, we are not alone in looking for an answer and a solution to our dire situation. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And you can know that we all stand in solidarity with you. And I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, Avexnim Cojti, Maya Quiche, Cultural Survivor Community Media Program and Indigenous Rights Radio Program Manager. Avexnim is from Chihuahua, Guatemala. She's a sociologist with more than 15 years of experience in the field of immigration and multiculturalism, and Indigenous community development and Indigenous rights. Most of her experience is in managing or delivering programs and projects that aim to improve the conditions of vulnerable populations. She's volunteered at community radio stations in Canada for many years and has represented cultural survival at international fora and United Nations meetings advocating for Indigenous rights. I'm going to turn it right over to you, Avexnim, to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good morning for those that are listening to us on the other side of this beautiful world. My name is Avexnim Cojti.
Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. This is the interpreter speaking. We need to do an interpreting switch. Thank you.
And if you could spotlight, thank you.
Ready?
We're good to go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, everybody. It's great to be with you, and it's great to see so many young people that are committed to to the social movement, to social change around the world. As I was presented, I'm a Maya indigenous person from Guatemala, and I'm also a member of the team at Cultural Survival, which is an indigenous-led nonprofit organization. We are a global organization with more than 20 staff around the world. We work on the advocacy of indigenous rights, and we support indigenous self-determination. Also, the revitalization of languages, cultures, and the political resilience for the last 45 years. Our work is based under the framework of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that supports collective rights. I would like to give the proper thanks to our ancestors, to Mother Earth, and I would like to acknowledge the territory where I'm a guest. This is the territory of the Anishinaabe people and of the Mississauga, close to the Lake Ontario in Canada, in the east coast of Canada. My pronouns are she, her, and I am with a red necklace, if you can identify me. So I would like to start, I really would like to be brief because I know that we had a little bit of interruptions. I would like to start by explaining just a little bit of context about who are indigenous communities or who are indigenous peoples. We are about 876 million peoples, 6 million people in around the world. We are in 90 countries. We are different size communities, and we live in different ecosystems. We account for 6% of the total population of the world. However, we account for the 15% of the most extreme poor people around the world. At the same time, we are communities that are supporting 80% of the biodiversity of the world, and we are stewards of 25% of the landmass of the world. I would like to share here about what we see as an organization, as a global organization that has local eyes in different communities, and also how I see it as an indigenous person from my own community when it comes to indigenous organization and the advocating for their rights, especially when it comes to climate change. The indigenous movement goes way back in time. And if I ask you, I'm sure that you know that when it comes to the indigenous movement, you would know that it comes from the resistance to colonization and the invasion in our territories around the world. So everywhere, all over the nations, there was resistance to colonization. And these were local struggles of our peoples. However, there was a start, or there was a movement, started of the movement at the international level. In North America, it started. When in 1923, with Chief Cayuga, who is the chief of the Iroquois Confederacy, traveled to Europe to be recognized as sovereign nations before the League of Nations, which now is the United Nations. That was the start of an international movement of indigenous peoples. In the last century is where indigenous peoples have become have had more light or more attention when it comes to their assertion of their rights, of their collective rights and their human rights. In the last, in 1992, sorry, with the resistance of the 500 years of colonization in the Americas, or what we call Abya Yala in indigenous language, that's how it started also another movement towards resistance. The international movement of indigenous people also had some successes in the past. In 2007, we had a victory with the establishment of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, where there were delegates from different nations to establish this set of standards that are asserting collective rights before states. this set of rights have been acknowledged by different states. They have been ratified by different states. But the problem is that the implementation is not seen, or is very little implemented by some nations. When it comes to organization, it's very important to know what type of organization exists within indigenous communities. And this is just very general. There is many different collectives in indigenous communities. There are some collectives that are called, that are sectorial. That means that there are women's organizations, there is youth organization, there is communications organizations. One of the successes, for example, in Latin America is the struggle and the fight of the Union of Coca plantation growers. That organization led to Evo Morales come to the presidency of Bolivia. So that's, for example, one example. Indigenous governments, there is indigenous governments that were never lost, that kept their lineage of leaders, and that's the ancestral systems of government, and they have been able to stay and remain. Some examples are, for example, communities in Mexico that have been able to maintain this way of government. Also, there is indigenous authorities within the Western system. That is, for example, chief and council in Canada, representatives, governors, or ministers that are within the different governments in different countries. And also, for example, spiritual leaders, councils of elders, for example, and individuals like communicators, journalists, intellectuals, authors, artists that make their contribution. However, one of the things that I would like to emphasize is that even though there is individual action, there's also that accountability to the nation. So it's always seen as a community. You stand out, but you're a member of your indigenous community. So it is very important to know these ways of organization, and we identify as Cultural Survival as a non-profit organization that supports the initiatives of these collectives on the ground in different countries. So what do we do as an organization to intentionally support the self-determination of indigenous communities? One of the ways is that we provide small grants. For the last 4 years, we have been able to support minimally with small grants initiatives by governments, indigenous authorities, by these groups, nonprofit organizations or sectorial groups, by supporting artists or youth, for example, that would like to create projects that are related to media when it comes to the traditional knowledge. Also initiatives that have to do with the sustainability of the community and the ways of living. That includes the food systems, for example, includes the farming, includes fishing, hunting, and gathering. That all these ways of sustainability of our communities, and also the maintenance of the traditional knowledge, that traditional knowledge that is very tied to the reciprocity towards Earth and the culture and how we perceive ourselves as part of Mother Earth. Also, we support the sharing of information of the United Nations declarations through radio programs distributed in many community radios. We try to support media within the indigenous community so that they can have their own narrative, so that they can balance also what's out in the commercial media, and which, as you know, it's very powerful and also very damaging to indigenous cultures and indigenous ways of living. So those ones are some of the things that we do. I was given one of the questions about what does centering those who have experienced most injustice and indigenous leadership mean? How does it look in practice when it comes to the climate change movement? One would be One will be focusing of movement or collectives and not individuals. Also to have indigenous peoples as allies within the climate change movement. Provide resources for indigenous-led initiatives that are also part of their struggle for land claims and assertion of rights to collective title of the lands. Those are some of the things that I would like to share with you. What are the limitations of indigenous people's advocacy and when it comes to the work in the communities? First is that there is no protection of the states. I share with the other speaker that there is repression from the government, there is corruption from the governments in the global south that are not allowing for indigenous communities to make their contributions to the climate change solutions. Also, there is a lot of criminalization of land defenders, water defenders. There is a huge amount of extractive industries, hydroelectric industries that are becoming stronger and stronger in different regions. Also, in communities like Latin America, we have a strong religion, a Christian religion that has also been detrimental to collective rights. Yes, that's pretty much what I would like to share. So thank you so much. I think that that's what I wanted to share, that the indigenous movement is a movement towards the recognition of collective land title, and that climate change cannot be climate change solutions cannot be detached from the relationship to the land and the culture of indigenous communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We now have some time for some Q&A. If anybody has any questions, you could raise your hand or put it in the chat. In the meanwhile, I do have a question for each of you, and that is, in just a few words, a sentence or two, can you tell us what gives you hope in the work that you do? And I'll start with you, Orion.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think in terms of what gives me hope in this work, I think for me, it's some of the most simple things. Like I think a lot about how, when I think about why I do this work, I think about our future generations and our young ones. I have a niece and two nieces and two nephews actually, and I just imagine, for me, it feels like so simple to understand, like that the labor that it takes to shape a better world, like if it was anchored outside profit and greed, but centered around how to build better conditions. And there's so much possibility in that. There's so much possibility in that different orientation, and I think that they're like, we're currently in such a society with so much knowledge and skills out there, and if we, the relevant challenges that we're in, I think that we could find a way, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Katherine, what gives you hope in your work?
I think I would agree with Orion with what he said. I also have nieces and nephews that I would want them to appreciate this world as how I appreciate it. It's a beautiful world, but our people do not have hold of the most productive resources and the most beautiful things that it has to offer. So I think that what gives me hope is that every day you dream of something better. You as an activist, we dream of a better world and a better relationship with one another. So yeah, that gives us hope. That gives me hope.
Thank you. Thank you. Avexnim?
I think what gives me hope is that it's to know that change is possible if you really put your mind into it. And it gives me hope to meet people like Mirna, like Katherine, sorry, people like Katherine that are so inspirational in their work, and knowing like all the exposure that they have to repression and to criminalization. It's and we know that they are at the front, and they need support.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can tell you what gives me hope. I'm retired. I'm a grandmother. And what gives me hope is my two grandchildren who are 10 and 12. And it's an imperative that we do this work. And that's what keeps me going. And I will continue it. Does anybody else have any questions? If not, I will turn it back over to Kitty to close out.
I think you got one question in the chat, actually. I can read it out loud. Jerry and Orion both talked about the importance of intergenerational activism. Curious if any of you have a favorite story or example of generations coming together to make change.
Great. Who would like to tackle that? No. How about you, Orion? Would you like to tackle that? You're muted.
Oh, I think, did you want to go first?
This is Avesh. As like, yeah, I think that I would like to share a story of the projects that we support. One of them was the capacity building of 20 kids in Zumpango, a community in Guatemala, where they learn how to do radio. And they were actually, this is a community that already lost the indigenous language. And through this training, they not only were learning to speak in front of the mic, which is something very important for indigenous communities, because we learn to be shy, we learn to be quiet, we learn to be obedient, and communication is a really powerful tool to lose that fear and get that self-esteem. But also it was a way for them to learn the language that was already lost. So that's just one example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I have an example. There's many examples out there, but the one that I think that's coming to mind for me is, so a few years ago at the UN climate negotiations in Madrid, our delegation was there on the ground, and we worked with dozens of grassroots organizations to hold an action at the closing day of the climate negotiations, the COP26. And that was such a beautiful example of folks coordinating together to really shine a light on the communities who had traveled from so far to highlight their stories and to show the sort of corruption that was happening. The context of it was that some of our relatives from the Amazon had come, as well as from the Arctic, and just really kind of imperiled regions that are going through a lot. And the climate negotiations was constantly like not deferring to the wisdom of those on the front lines that were experiencing these issues, but instead deferring the speaker space to just the heads of corporations and just sort of people that were really far removed from the issues. And so we led an action of 200 plus observers at the UN, basically called out the injustice of not being able to like center the voices of those that were most impacted, who actually had to redirect their travel because the negotiations were going to happen in Santiago, in Chile, but then the uprisings occurred. And so, that year was particularly intense because all of the systems of oppression were showing up in really visceral ways. The sort of police brutality and the repression that's happening all over the world. And so, my heart goes out to you, Katherine, as well for holding down that work. But for us to show up together, global youth, elders, folks in community that coordinated this action, to be able to highlight those things was really powerful. And we actually, it was so unprecedented in the action that actually 200 of folks were expelled from the UN. We all were at the threat of being debadged from the negotiation space. But it was actually like, there were so many roles that were being played there that like some folks mediated, and actually like we're telling the UN, like that this is like blatant injustice to like silence those that are the most on the front lines of these issues. And so actually folks badges were restored, and we were able to really give a clear sign to folks that the folks that grassroots community resilience is like not going away in this space or in any other space. And so, the fight continues. And yeah, it was really beautiful to see that connection and that coordination to show up for our relatives.
Thank you. We do have another couple of questions. Are there ways people can volunteer virtually for organizations or projects that you're working on internationally? So it's sort of virtual volunteering. Katherine, are there any opportunities with you?
Yes, that gives me hope. That makes me smile, actually. Yes, we are very much in need of people who can volunteer to help us in our websites, in our social media work, in designs for our publicity materials. Also, if you are a researcher, that is a very good thing for us. So actually anything that you think of your time, if you want to organize a small group from your community to listen to our stories, to listen to our leaders, to our youth, we can connect you to our young people. We welcome that. Somehow under the COVID lockdown, it really, internet has really become a window of opportunities for us who cannot travel and who cannot go around and mingle with people. So yes, please contact us. I will give our email. I will put our email in the chat box.
Great, thank you. How about you, Avesh?
Yes, absolutely. And in the same way as Katherine, we definitely need great minds, creative minds to support our work. And we do have, I think with university students, we do have internships at Cultural Survival, and definitely doing it remotely could work. And also my encouragement is to support the local indigenous communities where everybody is living.
Great, thanks. Orion, any opportunities internationally by virtual means with you?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of international engagement work, I think the things that come to mind is just for any young people out there, we as an organization are in the process of finalizing some of the programs that we're holding this year, and some of them are taking shape in the form of digital delegations to work specifically on pressuring different sort of movement targets to push them towards climate justice, as well as producing media for liberation. So we're building out a cohort in the form of a program called Story Shapers that's coming out soon. And so just be on the lookout for those things. I think definitely in terms of connecting with us, in the wake of the pandemic, our organizing really comes down to creating delegations. And so we are in the process of shaping out more ways to engage young people in this time. And yeah, being a sort of a stronghold for ensuring that anti-imperialist and just decolonial connection, decolonial commitment to liberation happens here on Turtle Island and on these lands. So that's deep work that we're holding down. So if anyone's interested in those topics, please feel free to connect with us, because we're in the process of pivoting the shape of our organization in the pandemic to make sure that we're holding programs that are carrying that spirit.
Great, thank you. One last and very important question. It's evident that the work that you all are doing is crucial, but also difficult and frustrating. How do you grapple with these challenges and balance your mental health, your fatigue, with your activism? And who wants to go first on that quickly?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Okay, I run a lot. I bike to work. So basically, I do a lot of physical work. It keeps me sane. And I love watching Netflix these days. So that's how I balance everything.
Thanks, great. Avesh?
I go for walks, long walks in the forest, and yeah, I try to dance, to put music to dance, to relax, and Netflix too.
Thank you. Orion?
Yeah. Can people hear me? My internet said it was unstable. I don't know. Okay.
You're good.
I would say for me, I think one of the things that's so important is to nurture an inner state of patience and compassion for yourself. I think in this work, it's really easy to internalize all the difficult challenges that come up. And, I think it's no surprise to anyone that's engaged in justice-based work that there are extreme highs and extreme lows of being in community, of coming together to make change larger than yourself, but then to feel overburdened and overwhelmed by the amount of intense weight that it comes with grappling with these issues. And so, I think tending an inner and patience for yourself, I think finding ways to tend ways to tend physical health, ways to tend mental health, to be able to give yourself rest when you need it. And I think also just being able to find an outlet for expression, whether that's through song, whether that's through poetry, writing, processing, walking, simple things. Remembering that the simple things are often the deepest medicines. Drinking water.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your amazing work. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kitty.
Echoing that thanks as well. Also, I especially just really want to say to everyone again, we're really sorry for what happened, but the reason why we wanted to bring together a very internationalist lens to kick off the series is to recognize that this movement building and this crisis is something that's happening everywhere. And it's easy, especially for most of us probably being in the States, to be siloed in our thinking, but not to recognize that when we hear those who are most impacted are Brown and Black and Indigenous folks, that is also international and global. And that when people say the global South, those are areas that are materially extracted intentionally, right? And that those burdens and those wastes, quote unquote, are displaced onto other bodies and onto other areas. And so that's why we really wanted to start and recognize that this work is international. And I think what happened today, while of course very unfortunate and traumatic in many ways, also underscores again the importance of that work and how in different contexts it's life or death sometimes, you know, as Katherine really pointed out, and to recognize that. And so I think that's something that I'm also just really sitting with, but I hope folks also carry and uses as a place to energize them in this work moving forward. So I really want to thank all of the speakers first and foremost, and also to Jerry for moderating. This wouldn't have been possible without y'all, and also to our wonderful interpreters, Jason and Sue. Thank you both so much, as well as quotes despite all the little bumps, and also to our tech, Ariel. And so if you'd like to stay in touch with this series, one of our folks will drop the link. They already did, so canyouhearus.org. You can stay in touch with us, and hope to see you at the next session, which is all about shifting the climate narrative and thinking about how we got to where we are, and climate visioning and storytelling and narrative building, and where we can really go. And I think we'll leave the last slide up for you, which is the next session and the time, but you can register online, and we'll have a new link to keep it safe as possible for folks. But thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.